What's King Lear really about? According to Pantaloon. When Lear is outdoors in the storm, he meets poor Tom, the seeming madman, who is totally alone, out in the wild and shivering beneath the wind and the rain and the cold. Nearly naked, he's hardly recognizable as a human being. Lear describes him as a poor, bare-forked animal. And the king asks, "Is man no more than this?" That seems to me to be the central concern of the play. Is man no more than this? No more than an animal? Of course, at the beginning of the play, it would never occur to anyone to ask this question. Shakespeare's audience had been taught by their Christian church that God had constructed the whole universe as a rigid hierarchy in which everything had its designated place. At the very top of the hierarchy was, of course, God himself, and then below him there were angels. At the next level down were humans, and then definitely below them were animals. Each separate layer was believed to be itself also constructed as a hierarchy, with a supreme individual who ruled over his inferiors, in the same way that God ruled in heaven. The supreme individual in the human layer was, of course, the monarch. This was a belief fervently held by the real-life ruler of Shakespeare's society at the time the play was written. King James actually told his parliament, "Kings are justly called gods, for that they exercise a manner of divine power upon earth." If you elevate your status to such heights, then you have a long, long way to fall. And if you have such rigid beliefs, but then find one by one they are unremittingly attacked and brutally broken, then your mind may eventually also be shattered. That is the story of this play. In the opening scene, Lear's apparent superiority is displayed on stage. Although the story may be theoretically set in ancient times, the Jacobean actors mainly wore costumes of their own period, which demonstrated by their magnificence the status of the wearer. So when the actor playing the king entered the stage, his royal robes made him visually the most striking figure, reinforced by his impressive crown, and seated on his throne, raised on a dais, while everyone else had to stand, or possibly kneel. Center stage, he dominated the scene, as eminent among humans as God was in his heaven. The parallels between the mythical King Lear and the contemporary King James were even clearer when Shakespeare's theatre company actually performed the play at the royal court. For the picture on stage was absolutely mirrored by the picture in the auditorium, where King James was also seated centrally on a raised platform of state, with his courtiers arranged about him according to status. The relevance of Shakespeare's play was unavoidable. In the first scene, Lear immediately asserts his status by informing his inferiors, "We have divided in three our kingdom." So he has already taken a momentous action without any consultation with his subordinates, confident that he is the sole owner of all Britain and can parcel it up as gifts according to his whim. However, having established himself as an autocrat, he then sabotages his own supremacy. He announces his retirement from the throne. "We will divest us both of rule, interest of territory, cares of state." Yet he foolishly thinks that he will not lose his status. He believes that he can retain the prestige, the name, and all the addition to a king. So he expects to be able to give up being king while still being treated as a king. But by this rash act, he begins the inexorable process that sees him plummet from his position as the highest in the land down to being companion to the lowest, poor Tom, the near-naked beggar. For now, though, King Lear is the most important person in Britain. His daughters are, of course, his subordinates. Princesses were obviously inferior to a king. Children were considered inferior to their father, and women were thought inferior to men. So he obliges his daughters to acknowledge his superiority before the court and basks in their hyperbolic estimates of his value. Goneril says he is dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty. And Regan tries to raise the stakes even further. She comes too short. These protestations are preposterous. But the king, in his smug egotism, accepts them as compliments appropriate to his preeminence. He will soon be disillusioned. When Cordelia says nothing, she is honestly answering Lear's question. What can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters? She can literally say nothing to surpass her sister's ludicrous excesses of professed adoration. Nobody could. Regan has told her father, I am alone felicitate in your dear highness' love. Cordelia can say nothing to exceed that. But in context, her blunt reply sounds not just undiplomatic, but shockingly insulting. Lear has just been told by Goneril that he is beyond what can be valued, rich or rare. So it now sounds as if Cordelia is telling him that he is worth nothing. This is the first challenge to Lear's beliefs, which are also the beliefs of Jacobean society. Firstly, Cordelia seems to be refusing to acknowledge the divine authority of the monarch, God's deputy on earth. And secondly, as the king's subject, she's acting disloyally by defying his wishes to speak as bidden. The king, of course, responds by asserting his power. He warns her that nothing will come of nothing. He strikes back by denying her an inheritance and also harming her chances of marriage. By removing her dowry, he thinks he is leaving her with nothing. But the pampered king has no real concept of what it is to have nothing. It is not until Act 4 that he will realize, they told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie. He has a long journey to go before he will question what a king is really worth. But for now, he's crushing any opposition to his supremacy. Having punished Cordelia's disobedience, he faces further defiance from Kent, who challenges him in the rudest terms. Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad? What wouldst thou do, old man? So Lear banishes him for his barefaced effrontery, which not our nature nor our place can bear. By saying that his place cannot bear the challenge, he is insisting that as king, his authority cannot be questioned. This is his primary belief, but it will face much greater tests. Goneril deliberately sets out to teach Lear that he no longer has the standing of a king. She says that she and Regan are determined not to be overruled. She dismisses her father as an idle old man that still would manage those authorities that he hath given away. And she scorns his reduced importance. Old fools are babes again. She instructs her servant Oswald to be disrespectful to Lear. When this happens, the affronted Lear demands, "Who am I, sir?" expecting the reply, "The king." But he is only acknowledged as "my lady's father." He's being deprived of his rank. The fool tries to make him realize that he has caused his own demotion. "Dost thou call me fool, boy? All thy other titles thou hast given away. That thou wast born with." But Lear is slow to learn. When Goneril picks a fight with him by complaining about the behavior of his retinue, he's shocked by her hectoring tone, and he cannot accept his relegation to a subordinate status. "Does any here know me? This is not Lear. Does Lear walk thus, speak thus? Who is it that can tell me who I am?" This is an echo of the verse in the Bible, "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am." But Lear shows no such certainty. By asking, "Who is it that can tell me who I am?" he seems to be losing confidence that he is God's deputy. In response, the fool tells him who he is now. "Lear's shadow." Both Kent and Gloucester still refer to him loyally as the king, but Regan and Cornwall blatantly challenge his royal privilege by putting his servant Kent in the stocks. Lear is completely unable to believe that they would dare to treat him as if he were of no importance. "No." "Yes." "No, I say." "I say yea."
"No, no, they would not."
"Yes, they have."
"By Jupiter, I swear no."
"By Juno, I swear aye."
"They durst not do it. They could not, would not do it. 'Tis worse than murder to do upon respect such violent outrage."
When he demands to speak to Regan and Cornwall, they assert their new superiority by refusing to see him, and he is left incredulously trying to claim his previous rank and entitlement.
"The king would speak with Cornwall."
But when Regan eventually does appear, she insists that he must accept the reduction of his status and power. "Oh, sir, you are old. You should be ruled." And then the two sisters, working together, measure his diminishing importance by the ruthless process of mathematical division. The number of his retinue, which indicates his status, is to be cut in half, from 100 to only 50. And then the number is halved again, from 50 to only 25. But the daughters do not stop there. They mercilessly continue to take away all his prestige. "What need you 25, 10, or 5? What need 1? This isn't just a squabble about protocol. They are destroying his self-esteem, bit by bit. They are crushing his identity. Out in the storm, we can see the change in his status. Not only is he without his royal crown, but he has no protective headgear at all. "Alack, bareheaded!" Kent cries. And by the next day his appearance has further altered radically, indicating the deterioration of his mental state, and also picturing the destruction of his royalty. Cordelia has heard that he is only crowned with rank fumiter and furrow weeds, with burdocks, hemlock, nettles, cuckoo flowers. We see him decked accordingly, a grotesque parody of his earlier appearance, emphasized by his incongruous assertion,
Come, come, I'm a king. My masters, know you that?
The contrast between what he once was and what he is now could not be more extreme. The gentleman voices the audience's response, a sight most pitiful in the meanest wretch, past speaking of in a king. When he is reunited with Cordelia, the beginnings of his mental recovery are reflected by him being dressed more normally. In the heaviness of sleep, we put fresh garments on him. But these are not presumably regal robes, for he no longer sees himself as an omnipotent king. He identifies himself as someone without power or rank.
I am a very foolish, fond old man.
His primary belief that he is the supreme creation on earth has been destroyed. But that is not the end of the assault. There are other beliefs which can be stripped from LEAR. Within the vast hierarchy that is the royal realm, there are other mini-structures, families. And yes, the family was seen as another hierarchy, with the father at its head, ruling over his children, as God ruled in heaven, and as the king ruled on earth. So when Cordelia in the first scene answers, "Nothing," she seems to be not only a subject disobeying her sovereign, but also a daughter rejecting her father, denying his love and refusing her duty. And a child's subservience was even commanded in the Bible. "Honor thy father and thy mother." A central tenet of Shakespeare's society was that families are bonded by love. It is a natural instinct. Therefore, if a child does not respond to a parent's act of love, then that child is behaving unnaturally. That is why when LEAR offers a gift of land, which he thinks is an act of love, then he regards Cordelia's apparent ingratitude as against the laws of nature. He brands her
a wretch whom nature is ashamed almost to acknowledge hers.
And since he feels she has rejected her father, he crudely retaliates by rejecting his daughter.
"Here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever, my sometime daughter."
Faith in these assumed laws of nature was justified by the widespread theory of astrology, the connection between events on earth and events in the skies. This was thought to prove that humans, like all the universe, were governed by immutable forces, and that to challenge this pattern was to initiate chaos. Gloucester connects disruption in the state and in the family with disruption above. "These late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us." When he hears Edmund's allegations against Edgar, he sees these patterns in the universe. "This villain of mine comes under the prediction, their son against father. The king falls from bias of nature, there's father against child." But while he's able to see Lear's unnatural behavior, the king falls from bias of nature, he is unable to see his own. He similarly explodes in fury, condemning Edgar without sufficient evidence, and, like Lear, disowning his child. "I never got him!" He even orders that Edgar be hunted down and executed without trial. Not in this land shall he remain uncaught, and found. Dispatch! Meanwhile, Lear is appalled when Goneril defies him. A second of his daughters is undermining a father's dignity and authority. Again, he condemns his child for unnatural behaviour, and he disowns her.
Degenerate bastard!
Moreover, this time he reacts with greater savagery, enlisting the goddess Nature to help him act unnaturally. He wishes to deny his daughter the natural process of procreation.
Here, Nature, here, dear goddess, here! Suspend thy purpose, if thou didst intend to make this creature fruitful. Into her womb convey sterility, dry up in her the organs of increase.
In his craving for revenge, he wants to prevent the existence of his potential grandchild, yet he accuses others of being unnatural. The primary prayer in Shakespeare's Christian society began by addressing God as Our Father, and proclaiming obedience to him. Thy will be done. So Lear might expect similar obedience from his daughter. But nothing can excuse his replacing a father's love with
a father's curse.
So much for the idea that families are bonded by love. When he goes to seek Regan's hospitality, he expresses the hope,
Thou better knowest the offices of nature, bond of childhood.
But only after he has threatened to disown her too.
I would divorce me from thy mother's tomb, sepulchring an adulteress.
And he now hurls the accusation of unnatural behaviour at both of his daughters.
You unnatural hags!
While he himself behaves with such barbarity that he becomes incoherent.
I will have such revenges on you both that all the world shall... I will do such things. What they are yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth.
His spluttering is undignified, and yet it's ferocious. Out in the wild, where the storm assailing his body accompanies the storm afflicting his mind, he's obsessed by his daughter's ingratitude. In his childish egotism, he wants to retaliate by destroying the whole world.
Smite flat the thick rotundity of the world. Crack nature's moulds, all Germans spill at once that make ingrateful man.
Of course, he continues to see himself as the victim, not the cause.
I am a man more sinned against than sinning.
And later, he again rails,
Filial ingratitude! Is it not as this mouth should tear this hand for lifting food to it?
But still he accepts no blame.
O Regan, Goneril, your old kind father, whose frank heart gave all.
When he sees Edgar disguised as poor Tom, he even projects his obsession onto him.
Didst thou give all to thy daughters, and art come to this? What has his daughters brought him to this pass? Couldst thou save nothing? Wouldst thou give them all?
Eventually he is completely broken, emotionally, physically, and mentally. All his raging leaves him exhausted, and he's an old man suffering from exposure to the elements. When he wakes and sees Cordelia, she asks for his blessing when traditionally the child kneels to the parent. But he inverts the hierarchy, by kneeling to her, as if she is superior. Then he finally accepts his responsibility for their estrangement.
"If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause, they have not."
His confidence in his role as paterfamilias has been crushed. Another fundamental belief seems to have been destroyed. I've said that Shakespeare's audience thought that the macrocosm, the universe, was ruled by God, and the microcosm, the realm, was ruled by the king. And then the smaller unit of the family was ruled by the father. Well, there is an even smaller unit, the single human being. And yes, in that, the body was said to be ruled by the mind. So when Lear's mind fails to control his feelings and his actions, it is another example of the ruler failing to rule. The mind is no longer king over the body. Lear's loss of his regal power to his daughters is accompanied by the encroaching loss of his mental power, and he is terrified by the process.
"Oh, let me not be mad, not mad, sweet heaven. Keep me in temper. I would not be mad."
Then,
"I prithee, daughter, do not make me mad."
And,
"O fool, I shall go mad."
later,
"My wits begin to turn."
and then,
"Oh, that way madness lies. Let me shun that, no more of that."
and he does go mad. We see him hallucinating, conducting a judicial trial of his daughters, who he seems to think are present. His inclusion of Edgar as a judge in the trial only emphasizes the difference between the fake madman, poor Tom, and the truly mad Lear. He no longer rules his country or his family, and his mind no longer rules his body. So, we have watched Lear lose his convictions that a king is superior to his subjects, and that a father is superior to his child. But what other hierarchy can be questioned? Well, one of the most basic beliefs is that a human being is at least superior to an animal. Kent asserts that humans merit better treatment than animals when he protests to Regan, "If I were your father's dog, you should not use me thus." And Cordelia shows the same values when she criticizes her sisters for turning Lear out into the storm. "Mine enemy's dog, though he had bit me, should have stood that night against my fire." When Lear undergoes the ruthless reduction of the number of his followers, he also holds to the certainty that humans are of greater value than animals. People merit more comforts than the absolute basics.
"Allow not nature more than nature needs. Man's life is cheap as beasts."
And when he accused Goneril of acting like a beast, he of course associated her with the most repellent creatures, birds that live off carrion.
"Detested kite."
And
"She hath tied sharp-toothed unkindness like a vulture here."
he also compares her to wild animals which are dangerous to humans.
How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child.
And
Thy wolvish visage.
in addition, Albany later denounces Goneril and Regan as tigers, not daughters. They are subhuman. Then Edgar, as poor Tom, repeats the church doctrine that by committing sins, humans debase themselves to the level of animals.
Hog in sloth, fox in stealth, wolf in greediness, dog in madness, lion in prey.
Edgar, who looks shockingly like a forked animal, tells Lear that a homeless beggar lives like a beast.
He eats cow dung, swallows the old rat and the ditch dog.
It's a powerful contribution to Lear's education. When he asks,
"Is man no more than this?" and declares, "Thou art the thing itself,"
he then tries to become like poor Tom, tearing off his own clothes.
"Off, off, you lendings! Come, unbutton here!"
But words are not enough to convince us that members of our species can degrade themselves to the level of beasts. We need to actually see supposedly civilized people committing shockingly savage actions. Gloucester's words accuse Regan and her sister of being inhuman towards their father. "I would not see thy cruel nails pluck out his poor old eyes, nor thy fierce sister in his anointed flesh rash boorish fangs." Boorish fangs, the teeth of a wild boar. Yet that's not enough. We need to see Cornwall inflicting horrific agony on the old Gloucester, who is tied to a chair and pinioned by servants. And then we need to see Regan enflamed with bloodlust as she demands more torture and more mutilation. One side will mock another, the other too. Her sadistic pleasure seems to make her worse than a beast. Is it possible to be worse than a beast? Well, in order to exaggerate his condemnation of Goneril, Lear pictures her as not just an animal, but as a horrifying affront to nature. He compares her to a monster.
"Ingratitude, more hideous when thou show'st thee in a child than the sea monster."
And then again,
"Monster ingratitude."
Thus he avoids any culpability himself by caricaturing his opponents as mutant creatures of evil, while representing himself as their innocent human prey. Yet we have to recognize that it was Lear who was first compared to a monster, when, in the opening scene, he actually called himself one.
"Come not between the dragon and his wrath."
He may have thought that the metaphor made him seem frightening and powerful, but a dragon is also a savage enemy of humankind, a monster. However, Lear is not the only user of this term. It is the view of humans that is suggested by others in this play. When Regan and Cornwall put out Gloucester's eyes, a servant expresses the fear that women will all turn monsters. And then Albany voices the dire possibility, humanity must perforce prey on itself like monsters of the deep. But Albany qualified his prediction. It would only happen if that the heavens do not their visible spirits send quickly down to tame these vile offences. And this apocalypse, of course, does not come to pass. Instead, the deaths occur of the characters who might be termed monsters. Goneril and Regan, Cornwall and Edmund. That might be reassuring. And yet we are then left with images from the opposite end of the scale. Humans as being of no more significance than the tiniest animals. Gloucester describes his encounter with poor Tom. "I such a fellow saw, which made me think a man a worm." And when Edgar tricks his father into believing that they're on top of a great cliff, he gives almost a god's eye view of humans, diminishing their importance by diminishing their size. "The fishermen that walk upon the beach appear like mice." Then in the last scene, after Cordelia's death, Lear again cries out that humans seem to have no higher status than animals. And he himself appears to give evidence of the similarity when he voices his grief in the sounds of a beast. Ho! 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 The animals to which he compares humans now are not mythical beasts. They are the ordinary creatures of everyday life. "Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all?" He protests against the privilege of life being given to these supposedly lower creatures, but not to the higher, angelic Cordelia. And so he challenges the validity of the universal law of hierarchy. His question remains unanswered. His belief is not restored. So we come to the Holy of Holies, the belief that at the top of the highest hierarchy is God. All of Shakespeare's audience were expected to attend Christian services, which included the declaration of the Creed, which means belief. It begins, "I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth." No playwright would take the risk of openly questioning that doctrine. This was an age when dissent from religious orthodoxy could get you arrested, tortured, and even burnt alive. Yet it still seems to me that Shakespeare dares to imply skepticism, but that he disguises it. He is nominally writing about the early Britons' pagan religion, not at all about contemporary Christianity, but the connections are clear. In fact, at the very time this play was being written, the English Parliament passed a law banning actors on the stage from even speaking the sacred name God. However, there were ways round this. They were allowed to refer to pagan gods, so that was what they did. But when an audience heard the permitted word gods, it sounded very like the forbidden word God. So it was very easy to think that the reference was to the Christian God. Another assumption that is challenged in this play is that the gods, or could that be God, are benevolent and merciful. Just before he's blinded, Gloucester mentions the kind gods, and then asks kind gods to forgive him for doubting Edgar's love. But later he describes the gods as being thoughtlessly cruel. "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." Perhaps the very existence of deities is up for question. When Albany hears that a servant has killed Cornwall in the act of blinding Gloucester, he claims that this proves the existence of just gods. "This shows you are above, you justicers." But on the other hand, when Edgar frustrates Gloucester's attempted suicide and urges him, "Think that the clearest gods have preserved thee," he is deceiving him. Gloucester may think that there has been divine intervention, But the miracle has in fact only been achieved by human trickery from Edgar and human gullibility from Gloucester. It might even be possible for a spectator to watch this scene and realize that Gloucester only believes in the truth of his religion because he's blind, and therefore cannot see what is clear to all the audience. And then would it be possible for that spectator to ask whether other humans believe in their religion because they are metaphorically blind? Anyway, whatever you think, I hope we can agree that more doubts surface. At the end of the play, a soldier is sent to save Cordelia's life, and Albany prays, "The gods defend her!" She has been presented as a personification of virtue. Lear, at their reunion, saw her as being already in heaven. "Thou art a soul in bliss." So we feel that she deserves to be saved. But the gods don't defend her. Her dead body is carried onto stage to join the bodies of Goneril and Regan. We can all see that the virtuous daughter suffers the same fate as the evil daughters. Would this make any of the original audience doubt the existence of just gods, or even a just God? The connection between the pagan characters and the Christian theatre-goers is strengthened when Cordelia echoes the words of Christ. In the Bible, Jesus says, "I must go about my Father's business," God's business. And Cordelia says, "Oh, dear Father, it is thy business that I go about." When the Christian audience heard those words, they would connect Cordelia with Jesus. And Cordelia is again implicitly compared to Christ when the gentleman says of Lear, "Thou hast one daughter who redeems nature from the general curse which twain have brought her to." All the audience knew that the figure who redeemed mankind was Jesus Christ, and that, although the twain here refers to Goneril and Regan, the original twain who provoked the general curse were Adam and Eve when they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. The echo is inescapable for the audience. Although the setting is pagan, the language is Christian. And like Jesus, Cordelia is killed, whereupon Shakespeare provides another reminder of the Bible story when Lear enters with Cordelia in his arms. The iconic emblem of Christianity is the figure of Christ on the cross, but another familiar image was of the dead Jesus lying on the ground, with his mother embracing in grief the body of her son. Shakespeare dares to end his play with the sight of a father embracing in grief the body of his daughter. So again, the author evades the fury of the religious authorities by showing us the doubts of pagans, but still implies the relevance of these questions to his own society. Of course, Christians are comforted by the reassuring belief that Jesus came back to life. But that is the point here. In the Bible story, there is a miraculous resurrection. In Shakespeare's human story, there is none. Lear says, "She's gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She's dead as earth." However, he is typically unable to accept this awful fact, so he desperately looks for signs of life. "This feather stirs. She lives. If it be so, it is a chance which does redeem all sorrows." Once again, the word redeem is being used about Cordelia, as Lear hopes that, like Christ the Redeemer, she can come back to life. Yet again he has to acknowledge the truth. Now she's gone forever. But again it is insupportable, so he dies trying to convince himself that he can see her breathing. Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there. However, Lear had already confessed, "Mine eyes are not of the best." And Albany had commented, "He knows not what he sees." And all the audience can see that there is no resurrection. Would this make some have doubts about the truth of the story of Jesus' resurrection? Maybe, but we must remember that many would find their convictions unshaken, since this was the fundamental belief of their religion, their view of the world, and their view of themselves. All these challenges to basic beliefs may seem to have a dispiritingly negative impact on the audience or the reader. And indeed, the text throughout is full of negatives, from Cordelia's shocking "nothing" and Lear's reply, "Nothing will come of nothing." And then when the fool tells Lear, "I am better than thou art now. I am a fool. Thou art nothing." And when Edgar appears in disguise and asks, "Who gives anything to poor Tom?" And Lear responds, "Couldst thou save nothing? Wouldst thou give 'em all?" Even when we reach the end of the play, Lear's speech is full of negatives. No life, no breath, thou'll come no more. Never, 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 never. It's a grim litany. Does the play offer any comforting positives? Well, King Lear is reminiscent in some ways of the medieval morality plays, where a central figure is caught between, on one side, the temptations of characters personifying sins, and, on the other side, the urgings of characters personifying virtues. In Shakespeare's play, Lear is the central figure, with evil characters on one side, Goneril, Regan, Cornwall, Oswald, and good characters on the other, Cordelia, Kent, Albany, the Fool, Gloucester. And the subplot provides a similar arrangement. Gloucester is caught between the evil son, Edmund, and the good son, Edgar. Shakespeare offers us some simple optimism by the medieval allegory of single combat between the brothers, good against evil. Edgar's victory encourages the audience to believe that virtue will triumph throughout the play. And so, after Cordelia and Lear are emotionally reunited, we expect them to survive. But then Shakespeare tears away the expected happy ending. They both die. You can understand why later audiences found the ending so shocking and so depressing that they far preferred Nahum Tate's rewrite of the play. In this, Cordelia survives and is to marry Edgar, while the reconciled Lear goes into serene retirement. This resolution is as saccharine and false as any sentimental film by the Walt Disney Company. People like that kind of stuff. It's called escapism. Sometimes even I like a happy ending. In Shakespeare's version, you might derive some comfort from the fact that all the evil characters end up dead. especially if you take the view that their violent killings represent the triumph of justice and virtue. But on the other hand, Cordelia is killed, along with the fool. Gloucester is dead, and Lear dies on stage. Some good characters do survive. Edgar, Albany, and Kent. But then, unsettlingly, Kent says that he's going to die. He sounds as if he's planning suicide, even if he phrases it as if it's an act of loyalty. "I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no." He continues this depressing tone by declaring that Lear wanted to escape the torture of existence. Oh, let him pass. He hates him that would upon the rack of this tough world stretch him out longer. Life is an ordeal which we have to endure. He adds, "The wonder is he hath endured so long." This recalls Edgar's bleak verdict. "Men must endure their going hence, even as their coming hither." But now Kent is determined to escape from the ordeal of life. So the only main characters really left standing are Edgar and Albany. Edgar's virtue is apparently attested by the fact that he prevented his father from committing suicide. He claims that he saved him from despair. However, when Oswald drew his sword to kill Gloucester, the old man actually encouraged his attacker. "Now let thy friendly hand put strength enough to it." He still wanted to die. He, like Kent, wanted to escape from the ordeal of life. And then, ironically, Edgar's final revelation of his identity to his father was such a shock to the old man that his flawed heart, alack, too weak the conflict to support, twixt two extremes of passion, joy and grief, burst smilingly. So disturbingly, the virtuous Edgar first kept his father alive, but then effectively killed him. However, most of the audience, of course, won't see it this way. For them, Edgar still remains the good knight. Albany seems at the end to be another reassuring figure, the mouthpiece of virtue and justice. "All friends shall taste the wages of their virtue, and all foes the cup of their deservings." But since the villains are all dead, who is he so keen to pursue and punish? Who are the foes he mentions? In the recent battle, if you think about it, his foes were Cordelia and Lear. No, Albany is full of bland, thoughtless cliches, and his version of justice sounds simply vindictive. However, many theatre-goers would be pleased by these promises, especially since the justice that he guarantees has been sought throughout the play. Lear calls on the gods to grant him justice.
"Let the great gods find out their enemies now."
But it sounds like no more than a desire for primitive revenge. He threatens his daughters,
"I will have such revengers on you both."
And Gloucester similarly vows, "I shall see the winged vengeance overtake such children." But are the motives behind their wishes any different from those of Cornwall when he warns Edmund of
"the revengers we are bound to take upon your traitorous father"?
Or when Cornwall is urged by Regan to put out Gloucester's other eye, and he replies,
"If you see vengeance"?
And is Albany's morality any different when he proclaims that the justice of the gods is based on revenge?
You justices, that these are nether crimes so speedily can venge.
This is a long way from Christian teaching. According to the Bible, Jesus said, "Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. But whoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." Yes, it actually refers to the loss of an eye, and Gloucester loses both his eyes, and urges the victim to renounce revenge. But Albany takes reassurance and satisfaction from the vengeance of the gods. And Shakespeare's contemporaries were no different. Although they were nominally Christians following the teachings of Jesus, yet a popular form of entertainment was a public execution, which could inflict the most agonizing and obscene tortures for the pleasure of the crowd. They ignored the injunction, "Love your enemies." Justice required savage revenge. But the play seems to end with hope for the future. Edgar, the supposed embodiment of goodness, is to become ruler over a new age of peace. However, he is not a man who turns the other cheek. Indeed, he proves himself skilled in violence, killing both Oswald and Edmund. And Edgar also subscribes to Albany's views on remorseless divine retribution. He actually announces that his father being blinded was only a just punishment for the sin of adultery by which Edmund was created. "The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us." Once again, I think many people then and now would see this as the restoration of civilized morality. But to me, the words of virtuous Edgar sound barbaric. In fact, I think that throughout the play, the obsession with taking revenge is actually fueled by anger, despite the fact that, to the Christian audience, anger was one of the 7 deadly sins, which rather undermines the moral status of revenge. Even so, Lear warns Kent, "Come not between the dragon and his wrath," as if boasting that anger is a regal quality. Then, when confronting Goneril and Regan, he asked the gods to "touch me with noble anger." So he does not consider anger a sin or even undignified. It is noble. And when he's out in the storm, he urges the winds to rage, as if all the universe should approve of his fury and should imitate it. Yet again, I wonder whether this is very different from the behavior of Cornwall, the fiery duke, who asserts the primacy of his own anger. "Our power shall do a curtsy to our wrath." And even Kent, who is supposedly a good character, justifies his attack on Oswald by claiming, "Anger hath a privilege." In Christian theology, the sin of anger can be suppressed by the virtue of patience. Lear pleads, "You heavens, give me patience, patience I need," and resolves, "I will be the pattern of all patience." But he's rarely able to stifle his volcanic wrath. He advises Gloucester, "Thou must be patient," but immediately explodes in a savage desire for revenge upon his sons-in-law. "Then kill, 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 kill!" And even in the final scene, he boasts of the revenge he took on Cordelia's executioner. "I killed the slave that was a-hanging thee." Almost everyone seems to relish righteous violence. And many playgoers would feel that this offers them the positive reassurance they crave. Is there anything that I would call heartwarming? Well, Cordelia does exhibit the virtue of patience, triumphing over anger, but it's in an idealized portrait describing how she received news of Lear's sufferings. Oh, then it moved her, not to a rage. Patience and sorrow strove who should express her goodliest. The abstract nouns, patience and sorrow, make Cordelia sound like an embodiment of virtues, as distant from struggling humans as a saint pictured in a church stained glass window. More evidence of her virtue is provided by her tears of compassion. This is encouraging because one difference between humans and animals is that humans shed tears to express emotion. However, Lear's tears are not compassionate. They are merely caused by frustration. He calls them hot tears. He's like a toddler having a temper tantrum. Indeed, Goneril observes, "Old fools are babes again." And he doesn't consider tears as evidence of compassion. He only sees them as a sign of weakness. "I am ashamed that thou hast power to shake my manhood thus." And again, "Let not woman's weapons, water drops, stain my man's cheeks." Even in the last scene, he clings to this macho bravado. "The good years shall devour them, flesh and fell, ere they shall make us weep." But others shed tears of compassion. Edgar is so moved by Lear's madness that he says, "My tears begin to take his part so much, they mar my counterfeiting." And Cordelia sheds holy water from her heavenly eyes, in distress at Lear's suffering. Then she hopes that her compassion will help his recovery. "All you unpublished virtues of the earth spring with my tears." And when she is reunited with him, he asks, "Be your tears wet?" And he tests by touching them. "Yes, faith." So he is convinced that tears can demonstrate human sympathy. It's also encouraging when people demonstrate the associated feeling, pity. Lear initially displays more macho posturing when he rejects Cordelia and boasts of his hard heart. "The barbarous Scythian shall to my bosom be as well neighboured, pitied, and relieved as thou, my sometime daughter." But surprisingly and encouragingly, when out in the wild, he begins to pity others. First, the fool. "Poor fool and knave, I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee." And then he widens his concerns. "Poor naked wretches, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness, defend you from seasons such as this?" He even accuses himself. "Oh, I have taken too little care of this." It is a significant step in his progress from total egotism. Pity is, of course, felt by Cordelia, who is appalled that her sisters don't share her sympathy for Lear, and tells him, "Had you not been their father, these white flakes did challenge pity of them." But other characters also show pity. Gloucester complains that Regan and Cornwall would not let him come to Lear's aid.
"When I desired their leave that I might pity him, they took from me the use of my own house."
But Gloucester's pity still makes him go out in the storm to help Lear, and he pays an awful price, the loss of his eyes. Also, the minor characters feel sympathy. The gentleman says of Lear, "A sight most pitiful in the meanest wretch, past speaking of in a king." And Cornwall's servants feel pity for Gloucester when he is blinded. The first servant intervenes and dares to fight Cornwall, and is killed by Regan. Then the third servant goes to apply first aid to Gloucester. "I'll fetch some flax and whites of eggs to apply to his bleeding face. Now heaven help him." So we do witness instances of common humanity. But by the end of the drama, it's a gloomy picture. The death of Cornwall was followed by that of Oswald, then Gloucester, Edmund, Goneril and Regan, the Fool, Cordelia and Lear. It has been a sequence of mass slaughter. Yet a note of optimism is struck when Albany proposes the creation of a new order, ruled by the good. As Queen Goneril's widower, he should take the throne, but he actually intends to reinstate Lear as king. "For us, we will resign during the life of this old majesty to him our absolute power." Then Lear dies, so Albany suggests to Edgar and Kent, "You twain rule in this realm." Unfortunately, if you think about it, you realize that by retiring from office, he is repeating the mistake that Lear made initially, and that by splitting the crown, he is proposing the same arrangement that led to such appalling catastrophe. And by addressing Edgar and Kent as "you twain," he is reminding us of the term twain being applied earlier to Goneril and Regan, the original recipients of the disastrously divided crown. If Albany's suggestions are followed, they could produce a return to chaos. Fortunately, most of the audience will not realize these uncomfortable realities. Instead, they will derive satisfaction from Edgar, the knightly champion of virtue, taking the throne. And thus, once again, they can feel that divine order has been restored. The king on earth corresponds to the king of heaven. They can feel that they are again secure, and that they have escaped all these threats to their essential beliefs. But whatever our beliefs, there is one thing that we can perhaps agree on. The final image of Lear, grieving over Cordelia's body, does indicate some progress. The king, who began as totally self-centered, is now overwhelmed by his feelings for another person. The father, who rejected his own daughter, now sees her as all-important. The man who began by boasting of his hard heart now finds that his heart is broken. He is no longer a dragon. He has become a simple human being. I pointed out earlier that the stage picture of the father, Lear, grieving over his daughter's body, recalls the religious image of the mother of Jesus grieving over her son's body. That icon is referred to by the Italian word pietà, which translates into English as pity. Yes, pity, the quality I've just been discussing. Lear is finally feeling pity. That brings me to the end of this gallop through King Lear. There's lots more to be said, but I think you have to know when to say thank you and goodbye. So, thank you and goodbye. However, in case anyone out there is as fascinated by this stuff as I am, I have added a bit more about the phenomenal stagecraft that Shakespeare uses during the scene of Gloucester's attempted suicide, with my suggestions about what his intentions are. And I also try to answer the question, in the bizarre, crowded section from then to the end of the play, what on earth is Shakespeare playing at? But that optional extra comes after the final burst of percussion. Yes, I'd like to draw attention to Shakespeare's most extraordinary piece of theatrical virtuosity, which occurs in the scene of Gloucester's attempted suicide. Act 4, Scene 6. Edgar and Gloucester walk out onto a bare stage. Where are they? Well, the last time we saw them, Gloucester asked Edgar to lead him to the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. So we might expect that they would appear on the theatre's upper stage or balcony, which could represent the high cliff. But no, they're apparently down on the main stage. So where are they supposed to be? Jacobean audiences had become used to characters in a play informing them where a scene was set. Everyone accepted that the bare boards of the stage could be supposedly transformed according to the needs of the play into a battlefield or a forest or, as in this play, open countryside. The actors described the location and the audience imagined it. But now these characters are giving us contradictory information. Gloucester says, "The ground is even," while Edgar replies, "Horrible steep." And yet all that the audience can see for themselves is a flat stage. What are they to make of that? And then Edgar asks, "Hark, do you hear the sea?" The audience are used to offstage sound effects, so they strain their ears, but they can't hear the sea. So now they're not sure what they're supposed to be looking at or what they're supposed to hear. When Gloucester answers, "No, truly," the audience find themselves in a similar state of confusion to him. Then Edgar gives further description. "How fearful and dizzy it is to cast one's eyes so low. The crows and choughs that wing the midway air show scarce so gross as beetles." His speech is quite long, with plenty of details of the view, and the audience imagine the scene, which means that some of them actually think that Gloucester is supposed to be on the edge of a cliff. But then some of them realise that the characters aren't actually in the setting evoked. Edgar's description of the view from the fictional cliff is just to mislead his blind father. The scene is not set on a cliff top. However, the audience has to work out somehow that the empty wooden stage does represent flat countryside. Shakespeare is breaking the rules. He's supposed to guide his audience, not disorientate them. While they are trying to cope with this mental challenge, some of them are likely to be as confused as Gloucester. They may even feel as blind as him. And that's the point. That's what Shakespeare's trying to do. The audience may be tempted to dismiss Gloucester as an old blind fool. He was easily fooled by Edmund, and he was blind to Edgar's virtue, just as Lear was fooled by his elder daughters and blind to Cordelia's virtue. and now Gloucester is physically blind. And so, as he lacks the sense of sight, seemingly inferior to the spectators. But Shakespeare prevents the audience from sitting smugly back and passing judgment on these old men. Instead, he contrives to give us the same sensation as Gloucester is experiencing. Of course, you really have to be in a theatre watching the actors to feel it. Gloucester can't see the cliff, but neither can we. There isn't a cliff, which means that our eyesight gives us little advantage. So how can we now condemn Gloucester and Lear as blind fools when we aren't sure what we're looking at? And that isn't the end of it. Shakespeare goes even further. He creates the harrowing situation of a blinded old man trying to commit suicide and dares to introduce a note of comedy. Unbelievable. A standard trick of a comic actor trying to get a cheap laugh is to fall down, either on his backside or flat on his face. It's called a pratfall. And it's funnier if it involves bathos, the sudden descent from the height of dignity down to a humiliating sprawl, when proud Homo erectus literally comes down to earth. This is a basic technique of comedy. Incredibly, Shakespeare gives the blinded, suicidal Gloucester a pratfall. How would a Jacobean audience have reacted? Would the groundlings at the Globe Theatre guffaw at the sight of the old man suddenly falling flat on his face? But would more sensitive spectators groan in sympathy? Because after all his suffering, he isn't even allowed to die with dignity. And what about modern audiences? Are they emotionally confused? Do some of them try to explain that confusion by using the label tragicomedy? This is another moment that only comes alive in performance. It cannot be experienced by the reader, only by a theatre audience, although reactions still may vary. Gloucester is totally lost. But have I fallen or no? Yet now the audience also find themselves becoming disorientated again, because Edgar once more begins to describe the scene that we have to remember isn't real. From the dread summit of this chalky bourne, look up a height. The shrill-gorged lark so far cannot be seen or heard. The reason that the lark cannot be seen or heard is that it doesn't exist. But Gloucester has to take its existence as a fact, while we have to take it as fiction, although we may still get mixed up. And now there's more confusion. It's shocking when you realize that not only is Edgar lying to his defenseless father, but he even actually urges the blind man to see. Look up a height. Do but look up. Is the son taunting his father for his disability? This makes us again confused in our emotions when we're already confused in our imagination. And what's the point of all this? Well, I've said that it would be tempting for the audience to dismiss Gloucester as a silly old man. But actually they find that they can't be so patronizing towards him, because they are also trying to grasp what is real and what is not. And now in addition, they are feeling contradictory emotions, as Gloucester has towards Edgar, which throw their judgment further off balance. Gloucester confessed earlier that his judgment was unreliable before he lost his eyesight. I stumbled when I saw. The audience is still able to see, but perhaps some of them feel at this moment that they also stumble. There is a piece to this. Our final sight of Gloucester is when he is left by Edgar alone on stage, and there he listens to the sounds of battle off stage, trying to work out what's happening. Now, Shakespeare has included in previous plays the sound of battles off stage, partly because he didn't have the resources to enact them. But he's never left a blind man alone on stage to listen to them. Why has he done this? Well, if you're only reading the play, your eyes quickly flick over the stage directions. But in a theatre, you hear the sounds of the battle alarm, then the clash of weapons and cries of soldiers, and then the trumpet call of retreat. And it all takes considerably longer. And during this time, we in the audience cannot help but empathize with the old man, for we find ourselves in the same situation as him. We too are unable to see the fighting. We are only able to listen and to guess at what's happening. Like him, we have only uncertain evidence on which our limited perceptions can base our ideas of reality. Yes, I'm suggesting that this play isn't just about Gloucester and Lear. It's about all of us, as we blunder about, making mistakes, and not sure what we should think, and not sure what we should feel. I realize, of course, that some people would say that all this is ludicrous intellectualizing. But I genuinely believe that this is what Shakespeare is doing in these unique scenes. He prevents us from remaining objective and coldly condemning both Gloucester and Lear for their metaphorical blindness and their ungoverned emotion. And he does it by putting all of us in the dark. We have to struggle to try to make sense of it all. And then we don't know what to feel. We all stumble. And now I'd like to look at the bewilderingly heterogeneous sequence which takes us to the end of the play. And again, I hope to suggest the purpose of this strange mixture of content and styles. Amazingly, after the overwhelming scene of the failed suicide, Shakespeare still manages to continue the emotional power and the dramatic innovation. We are confronted by the disturbing sight of Lear, the lunatic king, wearing a crown made of weeds, and we witness him conversing with imaginary people. "I pardon that man's life. What was thy cause? Adultery? Thou shalt not die. Die for adultery? No." So we categorize him as mad. And our diagnosis is confirmed when he explodes in unrestrained disgust at rampant lechery. Down from the waist they are centaurs, the women all above. But the girdle do the gods inherit. Beneath is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there is the sulphurous pit. Burning, scalding, stench, consumption, fire, fire, fire. But our certainties are undermined. For he is quite capable of rational argument when he attacks the moral hypocrisy of officials in power.
See how yon justice rails upon yon simple thief. Hearken thine ear. Change places and handy-dandy. Which is the justice? Which is the thief? Thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar, and the creature run from the cur. There thou mightst behold the great image of authority. A dog's obeyed in office.
And then Shakespeare continues to confound us, because Lear suddenly becomes completely lucid.
I know thee well enough. Thy name is Gloucester.
His total disillusionment about human life is expressed with logical simplicity.
When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools.
But then he erupts again in violent savagery.
Kill, 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 kill!
And he runs off crazily, calling as if in a hunt, Sa, 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 sa! Shakespeare has assailed us with extreme emotion, shocked us with the ugliest abuse, and bewildered us with the fluctuations of a brain in turmoil. I think the whole sequence of Gloucester's attempted suicide and then Lear's wild outbursts makes this the most extraordinary scene that Shakespeare ever wrote, or anyone ever wrote. But now what? Where does Shakespeare go from here? Well, the tone inevitably takes a great dip as the plot resumes with the routine dramatic content of violence and intrigue. The violence begins with Oswald trying to execute Gloucester, but being killed by Edgar. Then the intrigue follows with the letter revealing Goneril's scheme to murder Albany and replace him with Edmund. But after the previous section, this stuff all seems rather melodramatic and shallow. So what is Shakespeare playing at? Well, I think he's quite deliberately tricking the audience by providing them with familiar theatrical fare and so controlling their expectations. Good seems to be triumphing over evil in the traditional artificial fashion. And as more reassurance follows, the audience can sit back comfortably, confident that there will be a standard happy ending. But of course, the playwright, after feeding them the sweet staples of conventional entertainment, will finally dash their hopes with the most appalling shock. Gloucester dies, Lear dies, and worst of all, Cordelia dies. So by temporarily lapsing into dramatic cliches, Shakespeare creates cosy optimism that the ending will be predictably cheerful, and thus he makes the final unexpected horror all the more powerful. Dramatic cliches? Yes. After the usual excitement of violence and the usual intrigue of the letter, the next scene relies on the emotional trigger of extreme sentimentality. For the reunion of Lear and Cordelia is a real tear-jerker. There's hardly a dry eye in the house. She is crying, and he, a vulnerable and broken old man, falls to his knees to beg forgiveness. Shakespeare uses the simplest language to devastate us. I am a very foolish, fond old man, and I fear I am not in my perfect mind.
Do not laugh at me.
Who could resist it? I certainly can't. And to provoke more tears, Shakespeare even includes tender background music, as in the crudest melodrama. However, he does actually point out that he is using a standard theatrical device to drench us in sentimentality. He has the Doctor draw attention to it. Louder the music there! And so Shakespeare candidly indicates that he is manipulating the audience's emotions. And he also manipulates their expectations. Father and daughter are reconciled, and so we assume that they will live happy ever after. Act 5 then begins with the rivalry of Goneril and Regan, but it's brief and perfunctory, little more than sisters squabbling. So it continues to convince us that the villains are destined to divide and attack each other, and evil will fail. There is a setback to the progress of virtue when Lear and Cordelia lose the offstage battle and are captured, but Lear doesn't appear to see this as a tragedy. On the contrary, he seems quite content. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. He sounds like a monk going into a religious retreat. I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness, so we'll live and pray. It is as if he's retiring from the world, which he views with philosophical detachment. As if we were God's spies. And then more squabbling. Goneril, Regan, Edmund and Albany are involved in a four-cornered argument which is so rapid and undignified that it descends to the level of bickering and risks sounding comic. Despite the fact that he's discussing his wife's intended adultery, Albany lowers the tone by telling Regan that she can't marry Edmund because Goneril has a prior claim. And so, if you will marry, make your love to me. The absurd bathos of this is accurately summed up by Goneril. An interlude, or as we would say nowadays, a farce. Of course, the actors will do their best to make this sound vicious, but it's really rather anemic compared to Lear's earlier outbursts of searing hatred. It suggests again to the audience that since the villains are falling out amongst themselves, the play will still have a happy ending. Then, more violence to keep the punters happy. Edgar fights Edmund, and continuing the comforting illusion that the play is leading to the stereotypical triumph of good over evil, Shakespeare allows the drama to regress into the outmoded medieval convention of combat between the good knight and the bad knight, with its artificiality emphasized by trumpets sounding and a formal challenge issued. It is morally simplistic and totally unbelievable. And again, Shakespeare underlines its implausibility. Earlier, he had the Doctor draw attention to the unsubtle use of background music to make the Lear-Cordelia reunion almost mawkish. Now he similarly has Edmund admit that it would only be sensible to demand to know the intruder's identity. In wisdom, I should ask thy name. But of course he doesn't ask, because that would spoil the later standard dramatic reveal. And Edmund even announces that he is not compelled by the rule of knighthood to agree to fight the mysterious opponent. The improbability of his willingness to do so is then emphasized by Goneril. By the law of arms thou wast not bound to answer an unknown opposite. Shakespeare is giving the audience the simplistic morality they love and the violence, but is also pointing out that it's only old-fashioned show business. Albany again lowers the tone and risks bathos. "Shut your mouth, dame, or with this paper shall I stop it!" And following the traditions of popular drama, Edmund, totally unrealistically, makes a deathbed confession. "What you have charged me with, that have I done." Unbelievably, he even adopts conventional morality. "I do forgive thee." The actor playing the part nowadays has to work very hard to get away with this and stifle the audience's gasps of incredulity. Edgar then requests, "List a brief tale," but it isn't brief. He first gives an extravagantly romanticized version of the death of Gloucester, whose heart burst smilingly. And then he describes the clamorous grief of Kent, who bellowed out as he'd burst heaven. It's all passionate in the extreme, as popular drama often has to be, in order to keep the audience's attention. And to maintain the frenzied mood, Shakespeare quickly slings in the tragic cliché of "Enter a gentleman with a bloody knife. 'Tis hot, it smokes." Then he informs us of the deaths of Goneril and Regan in only 2 lines. Shakespeare makes sure that we don't have time to take it seriously. Instead, he keeps the superficial distractions coming. Enter Kent, and then the bodies of the 2 sisters are suddenly carried on. Meanwhile, Albany continues to invite derision. It's completely slipped his mind that the lives of Lear and Cordelia are in danger. "Great thing of us forgot!" Will anyone in the audience laugh? Next, Edmund, in the tradition of populist theatre, has a complete change of character, and again, Shakespeare emphasizes how unrealistic this is. "Some good I mean to do, despite of mine own nature." And so, after all this preposterous melodrama, the audience, of course, assumes that when they hear that Cordelia's life is in danger, the entreaty, "The gods defend her," will be answered, even if it is uttered by the ridiculous Albany. Surely the last-minute dash to save the heroine's life will be successful? Isn't it always? And that is when Shakespeare, having carefully cultivated our expectations, smashes them to pieces. Lear enters carrying the corpse of his daughter and howling like an animal. After all the flimsy fantasy of melodramatic cliches, this intrusion of savage reality comes as an appalling shock. And that's been Shakespeare's plan all along. He's provided us with a busy parade of familiar theatrical distractions which lull us into relaxed complacency. And then he hits us with real life, like a slap in the face. And it hurts even more because the play that seemed to be moving towards a routinely comforting resolution ends, after all, as a devastating tragedy. Finally, I would suggest that even for those who do not have religious convictions, King Lear, from another aspect, isn't all negative. For one way in which humans are divided from animals is their ability to participate in drama. Yes, to participate in drama. So by watching or reading King Lear, we demonstrate our special qualities. Shakespeare, by the act of writing this play, exhibits another specifically human ability, the use of complex language. Furthermore, he doesn't just employ it to convey meaning, but also, by poetry, to create emotion. Then he and the audience or readers become involved in the story by the exercise of a third solely human faculty, the imagination. Actors on a bare stage, or words on a piece of paper, can only come alive by the workings of our imagination. And by feeling concern for these purely fictional characters, and even shedding tears for their misery, we show our compassion, and thus our humanity. Gloucester may have been made to think a man a worm, but a worm didn't write King Lear.